Many encounters with fairies describe them as being perfumed, smelling like roses or other sweetly fragrant flowers. Isn't that lovely? But, lesser known fact, the fairies, when they're not happy, can stink and are known to use foul, unbearable smells to communicate their message to humans. Sometimes just to warn them off, other times to punish them. I have 3 incredible true accounts to share with you from Ireland. The first comes from County Meath. Once a man was coming home from a ceilidh, and on the road he met a dog with startling red eyes. The dog walked the whole way home with him, and when the man got home there was a terrible smell on him, and all his clothes had to be burned. The next day the man fell ill. Skin started peeling off his body, and after a few days, he died. So there's an extreme example of fairy using smell in dealings with humans. Fairy wield their control of this overpowering smell as a weapon. They attach it to a person and it stays with them until the fairy get the outcome they desire. Imagine having this smell fixed on you. There would be no escape from it, and if nothing else, this could certainly lead to death by insanity. I wonder why this man was singled out. Perhaps it was a random meeting and not personal at all. Or maybe he had offended the fairies in some way. The smell itself was described as terrible and certainly offensive enough for to burn the clothes, but I've read some accounts which describe the smell as similar to rotten eggs, a smell, if you're ever unlucky enough to experience, that you will never forget. Take a look at this person's experience. This happened in County Mayo, and it gives a clear insight into why this person was exposed to the fairies' foul-smelling message. There lived in Ballinlough a young man named James Cairns who pulled out a whitethorn bush in the fairy fort that was above his house. And when he came back down to the house, he couldn't stand the awful smell that was on him. He washed himself upside down, but he couldn't get rid of the smell. When his mother came in, she asked him what had happened to him, and he told her about the awful smell that was on him. She asked him where was he last, and he told her that he was above in the fort pulling a whitebush. She told him to go back up to the fort and put down the whitethorn bush exactly where he had got it from. And when he did that, the smell went off him. So the lesson here, should we need reminding, is not to meddle with fairy forts or whitethorns. In this case, we can see a direct line between his actions and the revenge taken by the fairies. And when he undid the damage, the curse of the foul smell was lifted. So clearly these fairy were far more forgiving than those in the first story. On the top of Slieve Golry there once was worked a great sand pit by the local peasantry, who made their living by quarrying sand and trading it to distant contractors who were at that time building provincial towns in the Midlands. Now, at the back of this sand pit, on the southwest side, there was a deep hole, or well. It was held sacred by the local people, and anyone who interfered with it in any way was supposed to meet with trouble. However, the sandpit was becoming exhausted, and year by year the quarrymen were working in the direction of the well. As time went on, the seam was being worked until the quarrying almost reached the well. One day, the sand in the face of the pit turned into yellow clay, and the men had to cease work. They left off, but commenced work on the southeast side of the quarry. Owing to the material being held up for some days, the men were obliged to work overtime, which meant working until nightfall. The first dusky evening that the men worked, they saw a blue light rising out of the well, and this made them very fearful. Some of the braver men amongst the crowd ventured to walk towards the well, but they were driven back instantly by a very strong, sickening smell of sulphur. At least, that's what they thought it was. The next day, the men began to work again and didn't leave the quarry until nightfall. This time, small pieces of sand and stones came out from the direction of the well. Little by little, the sand or stones became larger until finally the men were obliged to depart from the quarry altogether. They went back a distance of about 100 yards from the quarry and stood in conversation for some time, watching the showers of stones which were being belched from the well. As the evening went on, the stones became much larger until finally large boulders were being flung all around the quarry. This caused the men to debate among themselves the cause of such a remarkable happening, and they soon decided to go home. Some of the men called on a very old man on their way home and told him what had occurred. He told them that there was a fairy well on the top of Slievegory and asked the men in the name of God to close the well early next morning. A small party of men went back to the quarry the next day to close it, and on arriving at the spot, what did they find but a big granite flag covering the well? This flag is still to be seen on the top of Slievegory. The men then, through fear, closed in the quarry and made it level with the rest of the mountain. And no one has ever dug for sand in that part of the mountain since. Fairies sometimes use offensive smells to catch our attention and alert us that they are not only there, but that they are not happy with their human neighbours. These fairies clearly understand how affected we are by strong smells, and they use this knowledge to send us a very clear, uncomplicated message. Stop what you're doing. Or perhaps just a firm go away. Well, forewarned is forearmed, as they say, and now you know that if you suddenly reek or find yourself in a place which has an inexplicable stench, that the fairies could be nearby and they're not happy. Sending love and thanks to my patrons, absolute legends, everyone. If you'd like to be an absolute legend too, check out the link to my Patreon in the notes below. And look out for next week's video for another sign that fairy are nearby. Until next time, stay curious and be kind. Cheerio!